Now I would invite Becca Cornett to lead us in this morning's reading.
Our reading is an excerpt from Sabbath by Wayne Muller. One morning, several years ago, Neil Rudenstein, who was the president of Harvard at the time, overslept. For this perfectionist, in the midst of a major fundraising campaign, it was cause for alarm. After years of nonstop toil in an atmosphere that rewarded frantic overwork, Rudenstein was severely fatigued. Only after a 3-month leave of absence, during which he read essayist Lewis Thomas, listened to Ravel, and walked with his wife on a Caribbean beach, was Rudenstein able to return to his post. That week, his picture was on the cover of Newsweek beside the headline, "Exhausted." In the relentless busyness of modern life, we have lost the rhythm between action and rest. As the founder of a public charity, I visit the offices of wealthy donors, crowded social service agencies, and the small homes of the poorest families. Remarkably, within this mosaic, there is a universal refrain: I am so busy. We say this to one another as if our exhaustion were a trophy, our ability to withstand stress a mark of character. The busier we are, the more important we seem to ourselves and, we imagine, to others. To be unavailable to our friends and family, to be unable to find time for the sunset, or even to know the sun has set, to whiz through our obligations without time for a single mindful breath, this has become the model of a successful life. Yet the more our life speeds up, the more we feel weary, overwhelmed, lost. Our life and work rarely feel light, pleasant, or healing. Instead, as it all piles endlessly upon itself, the whole experience of being alive begins to melt into one enormous obligation. Because if we do not rest, we lose our way. We miss the compass points that show us where to go, the nourishment that gives us succor, the quiet that gives us wisdom. How have we allowed this to happen? I suggest it is this: we have forgotten the Sabbath.
I just love that Tori Amos song. Thank you, Eva, for sharing it with us. In Nancy Fink's memoir, Strangers in the Midst, which is the story of her conversion to Judaism, she describes the preparations that she and her soon-to-be husband would make for Shabbat. She writes, "On Friday afternoon, At the very last minute, we'd rush home, stopping at the grocery to pick up supplies. Flying into the kitchen, we'd cook ahead for the next 24 hours. Soup and salad, baked chicken, yams and applesauce for dinner, and vegetable lasagna for the next day's lunch. Sometimes I think how strange it was to be in such a frenzy to get ready for a day of rest. Shabbat preparations had their own rhythm, and once the table was set and the house straightened, the pace began to slow. "It's your turn first in the shower," I'd call out to Michael. "Okay, but it's getting late," he'd answer, concerned about starting Shabbat at sunset. In the bathroom, I'd linger at the mirror examining myself, stroking the little lines on my face, taking as much time as I could to settle into a mood of quietness. When I joined Michael and his son for the lighting of the candles, the whole house seemed transformed. Papers and books were neatly piled, flowers stood in a vase on the table, and the golden light of the setting sun filled the room. "Shabbat is like nothing else," she writes. "Time as we know it does not exist for these 24 hours, and the worries of the week soon fall away. A feeling of joy appears. The smallest object, a leaf or a spoon, shimmers in a soft light, and the heart opens. Shabbat is a meditation of unbelievable beauty." You know, when I was a kid growing up in Connecticut in the 1970s and 80s, I knew nothing about the ways in which observant Jews prepared for Shabbat. However, in retrospect, our Sundays were a little bit familiar, a little bit similar to that. Sundays was our day of rest, a visiting with friends day, a play day, a rhythm to the week that could always be counted on. Church in the morning, something that was definitely not optional in my house, was a time to relax with friends and family in the afternoon and youth group in the evening. There was no soccer practice, no karate, no play rehearsals or recitals. There were no chores being done, no lawn mowing or house painting or gardening or laundry. It was the Sabbath. It was a day that was different from all the other days, a day set apart. I mean, it seems almost unreal, doesn't it? Like a different world. Certainly another time that doesn't exist now. So much competes for our attention in the world. You know, we're pulled in a multitude of directions. We're scattered, harried, stressed, overworked, and overwhelmed. Even those who would like to take their spiritual lives more seriously will often discover how difficult it is to set aside even a few minutes a day to stop and to really pay attention. And yet, according to the Jewish and Christian traditions out of which we use have emerged, we are to stop for not just a few minutes each day, but we are to stop for a whole day each week, a whole day, a holy day, the Sabbath. I mean, did you know that this whole idea of keeping the Sabbath wasn't just a suggestion in the Holy Scriptures? It was actually a commandment. One of the 10 commandments that Moses supposedly received from God himself up high on that mountaintop. You know, in the first 3 commandments, God reminds the people who he is. "I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make idols to other gods or bow down before them. And you shall not take my name in vain or make wrongful use of my name," as it says in more recent translations. And then, right after making clear he is the one and only God, he creates the concept of Sabbath. The 4th commandment says this in Exodus 20, 8 through 11. Remember to keep the Sabbath day holy. You have 6 days to labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. A day you shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your slave or your slave girl, your cattle or the alien within your gates, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and on the seventh day he rested. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Well, it was the rabbis over time who interpreted what this commandment might mean when it says that we are to not do any work on the Sabbath. The first thing they did was to identify 39 categories of activities to be avoided on Shabbats, and then they fleshed out the implications of those 39. If one is not to light a fire, for example, one also ought not handle matches or kindling. You know, it's easy to look at the Jewish Sabbath as a long list of thou shall nots. Don't turn on lights. Don't drive. Don't cook. Don't carry a pair of scissors anywhere at all, for if you carry them, you might be tempted to use them. And cutting is also forbidden on Shabbats. It's okay to carry a stone or a sweater or a scarf, but only inside your own house, not out into the street and then into the house of another. Don't plan for the week ahead. Don't write a sonnet or a haiku. Don't even copy down a recipe. And while you're allowed to sing, you shouldn't play a musical instrument. And of course, you mustn't turn on a radio or a record player. Well, back in the earliest days of Judaism, there were some groups of Jews who took God's commandment to abstain from work on the Sabbath so literally that they would sit motionless from sundown to sundown for fear that if they moved, they might break this commandment and be put to death. By the time Jesus came along, however, a complex oral interpretation of the law had evolved. This interpretation, which later became the Talmud, contains long lists of things that are forbidden to do on the Sabbath. The purpose of spelling this out in such minute detail, however, was intended to let the people know what was permitted to do so that they wouldn't have to sit motionless with their hands folded and heads bowed all day long. According to one of the legends, the Sabbath was not God's punishment on the people of Israel, but instead it was God's way of giving the people a glimpse of the world to come. This legend says that at the time when God was giving the Torah to Israel, he said to them, "My children, if you accept the Torah and observe my commandments, I will give you for all eternity a thing most precious that I have in my possession." "And what," asked Israel, "is that precious thing which thou wilt give us if we obey the Torah?" And God replied, "The world to come." But the Israelites insisted, "Show us in this world an example of the world to come." And God replied, "The Sabbath is an example of the world to come." Sabbath is not intended to be a dismal, dreary, painful day. After all, if the whole idea was to encourage people to obey the Torah by giving them a glimpse of the final prize, that world to come, final prize certainly shouldn't be something to dread. So, instead, the Sabbath evolved into a day of religious celebration. It became a day in which work is to be set aside so that God can be praised and his creation celebrated. It became a day of inspiration, a day filled with joy and with love. And for those who shaped their lives around the Sabbath, their relationships to nature, to God, and to each other were altered. They were deepened, expanded. Their lives became more whole, more in touch with the holy. Now, I know the kind of lives that most of you live. I know the kind of life I live. What I want to suggest is that we think quite seriously about this ancient concept of Sabbath and figure out if there might be some way that we can incorporate it into our lives again today. I know it's a radical thought. Setting aside a large block of time every week in which we stop working seems like a strange concept. How could the world survive without our constant vigilance and diligence, without our 24/7 connection to the internet, to our phones? How could we earn enough money? When would we get our household chores done? When would we go shopping? When could we fit in our civic duties? When could our children's sports teams practice and schedule their games? When would our committees meet? When, indeed. For so many of us, even finding a few minutes each day to stop and pay attention seems like a formidable task. Taking a whole day for Sabbath? Impossible. Our society just doesn't support it. It's no longer part of the custom. It's not even legislated anymore. Those old blue laws have all disappeared. And yet, I know that there are quite a few people right here in this congregation who have made conscious decisions that being here on Sunday mornings is an important part of their weekly rhythm. They've discovered that coming here to be quiet for an hour, to reflect on their week, on their lives, is helping them keep everything in perspective. They've discovered that singing, that giving thanks, that acknowledging all of their blessings, it makes a difference somehow. It makes a difference in the way in which the rest of their week unfolds. And there are lots of people in this congregation who are making conscious decisions that setting aside time for family and friends on a regular basis is important. And that time for solitude and reflection is equally important. There are lots of folks in this congregation who know that our greatest fulfillment in life doesn't come through endless, nonstop work and frenzied, nonstop activity, who know that real fulfillment comes through deepening our relationships, through soaking in the beauty and the goodness of creation, through being conscious, being fully attentive to this world in which we live and all those living things that share the world with us. I'm not meaning to suggest at all that work is bad. If you recall that Christian story in the Torah, God didn't sit around resting for all 7 days. No, he worked pretty darn hard for 6 days and then rested. He took time to look at what he'd done, and he found that it was beautiful and good. What I'm suggesting, my friends, is a little more balance in our lives. Laundry needs to be done. Shopping needs to be done. Lessons need to be learned. Money needs to be earned. And there are wrongs to be righted in this world of ours. Injustice, disease, poverty. These things need our attention and our focus. Yes, it is the work we do during the first 6 days of the week that can make a difference in the world and bring deep satisfaction and meaning into our lives. But on the seventh day, we need to stop, we need to rest, and reflect if we are to find life beautiful and good. For observant Jews, Shabbat ends with a meal in which they bid farewell to the Sabbath. The last thing that happens is that parents will bless their children and give them a bit of sweet spice so that the taste of Sabbath peace will linger on their tongues. May all of us find ways to taste that sweetness of the peace found within Sabbath. So may it be. Amen.